Hey folks, nice to have you back for another week. Just as we were getting rolling on this video in Alberta, we actually had some news come out. Now, Jen, we're not going to put this in the dispatch. You're going to put this in your column, which you'll come out with, I guess, on Friday. Tell me about the report that just landed and surprised absolutely no one.
Yes, so we have been watching for the Allen Inquiry report for a couple of months now. This was one of the promises that Jason Kenney made when he was elected. Remember back when he was elected in 2019 now? I've kind of forgotten, lost track of time. Anyway, back when he was elected, it was all the socialists are destroying Alberta. Alberta needs to stand up for its resource and oil industry. We're going to be the tough guy, takes it to Ottawa. We're going to start a war room, and we're going to get a fair deal panel going. And we're going to do an inquiry to look into all of these, foreign funds that are going into destroying our tar sands industry, right? Of course, always minimizing the fact that huge impact on Alberta's industry has actually just been global oil prices, which we have no control over, and blah 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 blah. Anyway, not to say that there wasn't a fairly organized and orchestrated campaign against Alberta oil. Of course there was. I mean, pick up the freaking newspaper. It was not subtle. So anyway, as part of these promises, he promised this inquiry into the foreign funding of oil. And of course, this was also wrapped up into a lot of conspiracy theories about basically it's the Rockefeller Center who is funding oil sands in order to give an unfair competitive advantage to windmills and things like that, and their own sort of local or their own domestic oil and gas production, fracking, that kind of thing. Basically, the conspiracy theory underlying all of this inquiry was that this was a strategic effort to landlock Alberta's oil in order to give American oil a boost. 30 seconds could debunk that. I mean, these same groups were also targeting American pipelines and American oil producers as well.
And you mentioned fracking. They hate fracking. They've been trying to shut fracking down everywhere.
Totally, I know that, but I mean, the reason why Alberta was an easy target probably was because, in part, it was a foreign producer of oil to American groups, and also because we had to cross a border. A key strategic weakness that they could target, right?
You guys have a series of strategic weaknesses. Like, I'm just saying this cynically. Like, if my goal is to knock out parts of global oil production, I don't look at the Saudis. Like, they're so geostrategically critical that, like, we all know that if we just kneecap Saudi oil, the Middle East would just go collapse into chaos. So Alberta oil, it's in a Canadian jurisdiction. We're easy to pick on because we're small. It is landlocked, so it's easy to try and stymie it. Also, as we all know, it is high cost oil to extract and refine. Like, that's 3 strikes against you guys already before you touch a conspiracy.
Cost, but it is GHG intensive.
Yeah,
it's not the most GHG intensive oil. Actually, I think Venezuelan crude is more so, but it's one of the more heavily intensive oils to produce. This is often misunderstood. Now, personally, I think a lot of these campaigns are misguided because they go after supply side environmentalism as opposed to demand side. Just cutting out a supply doesn't fix the problem unless you're actually diminishing demand as well. And not focusing on supplies makes strategic sense because it allows people to focus on an obtainable target. I can politically target the Keystone XL pipeline, and with enough political mobilization can shut that down. But unless you're actually reducing your demand of oil, you're just going to fill that supply from other sources, right? So it's an interesting problem. But anyway, the inquiry came out today and found, lo and behold, now Matt, brace yourselves. Are you ready?
I'm seated. I'm ready. What
they found was that indeed some American corporations spent about American organizations spent about $54 million they sent it to organizations to create a campaign to block the oil sands.
Are these notoriously anti-Alberta organizations, or are they perhaps anti-fossil fuel?
They're anti-fossil fuel organizations.
Who could have guessed?
What so glad we spent $3.5 million getting to the bottom of something that you could have understood if you basically read the news.
Read a newspaper.
Yeah. Read a newspaper.
All right. Well, look, you've got enough. Yeah, you'll put that, you'll pull that together. And basically, so we spent you spent $3.5 million to confirm that Neil Young doesn't like Alberta oil. So
thanks, Tips.
Okay, so you'll put that in a column. We won't go into the dispatch. Top item on the list for the dispatch is I'm starting to absolutely hate a particular part of the Twitter experience. Now, there's a lot of things I hate about the Twitter experience, but one thing in particular I hate about it is like in their news feed feature or their trending feature, it's like people react to X saying Y. Like it's like the dumbest possible way of informing anybody because somebody is always angry at somebody for saying something. This week, it was dumber even than normal because I think people were angry at Margaret Atwood, not actually for having said anything, but for if I'm right about this, she retweeted a Rosie DiManno column from the Star. Yeah. She didn't even write the thing. She just clicked retweet.
She literally retweeted a Rosie DiManno column.
And then Twitter, the reaction was so strong that Twitter actually created a story talking about the reaction.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I haven't even read Rosie DiManno's column here, but basically the title of the column was like, why can't we use the word woman anymore? And like, if you've been following sort of the discourse on trans activism, you know, the word in certain circles, the word woman is now considered sort of non-inclusive language. And it's being replaced with
people with vaginas,
you know, people, blah, 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 menstruators, that kind of thing. So anyway, Rosie writes a column about it. I have to read the column, whatever. I'm sure I can predict what's in it. But Margaret Atwood,
I have read it, and it is nothing. There is nothing there that will surprise you.
Okay, so Margaret Atwood retweets it, and of course everybody freaks out, and they basically start saying this is ridiculous, transphobic turf shit. And what you know, you can still use the word woman. Some of us are just preferring to use you know, more inclusive language, but no one's gonna like come up and like, you know, punch you if you use the word woman. Like, don't be ridiculous, kind of thing. Like, this is all just a part of a transphobic turf kind of diatribe, and it's all fake. Blah blah blah. So here's the fun thing. Here's where I kind of step in on this point. Like, firstly, the one thing that I'm really happy about is that we can all agree that using the word woman is fine now. That's great. Because last year, remember, I got into trouble on Twitter because I was like, I find some of the phrases, the sort of like the more inclusive, apparently, phrases, I find them really dehumanizing. I think referring to women, and by the way, it's only ever just women, it's never men. But I think referring to, you know, uterus havers who are pregnant to be intensely dehumanizing language. Like, I think referring to us by our body parts or by our bodily functions is intensely dehumanizing. I don't really care who wants to call themselves a woman. I don't really give a shit. But, you know, some of this inclusive language is really artificial, and it's very dehumanizing, and it's really quite offensive to me as a woman. And also, I just also think that I can't help but note that it seems like all of this inclusive language seems to focus very heavily on the female sex as opposed to the male. And I think that disparity is a problem for me. So anyway, I said that on Twitter, lo and behold, and then what happened is that a semen squirter doctor or pharmacist or whatever.
This was for context, and this is what happened last year.
Yeah, this is what happened last year. Literally started to try to start a campaign against me, emailed all my employers as a freelancer, and basically accused me of transphobia and homophobia for basically making this incredibly hot take where I don't like being called a uterus haver. What a scintillating hot take that was. Anyway, he emailed a bunch of my employers, and so I wrote a story about it for The Line, and was just exposed him and was like, no, I'm not gonna, you know, you want to start a campaign like this against me, that's fine, but now I'm gonna expose you too. Anyway, long and the short of it is that last year, demanding the use of the word woman or preferring to be called woman was a cancelable offense. This year, it apparently isn't. And what I think is totally disingenuous about the attacks on Margaret Atwood on all of this is, like, we all know that in a year from now, the goalposts are going to totally shift again, and using the word woman is going to be considered non-inclusive language, and you're going to be called a bigot for it. The purpose of the exercise is to constantly shift the goalposts in order to hunt out and seek heretics as a form of social control. It's creating a constant ground of where the ground is always shifting, and you don't know what's right and wrong, so you just shut up. That is the whole purpose of the exercise. And like, it's insane. So like, I think that's worth pointing out.
I remember, first of all, one thing, read the Domano column. The Star also did run a reply to it already.
Which is great.
Yeah, read that as well, just purely because I think it'll benefit you to have read both. I have nothing to contribute to this part of the video. And the reason this is, I have like a prime directive of not getting involved in this stuff. First of all, I'm averse to culture wars in general. I've always been a national security hawk, and I have a genuine belief that culture wars corrode our ability to face external threats because we're tearing each other apart internally. I tend to view this stuff as usually a distraction. I do find it interesting though. And I was talking just a few days ago, a friend of mine, a woman, I went there. She's a woman, she's an older woman, and she is, there's a pretty good chance if you are very online, you would know who this person is. Has a considerable presence in the Canadian political Twitter area. I was talking with this person privately, and she just said to me, "I'm a woman. Why? Rosie DiManno's a woman. So is Margaret Atwood. Like, why is this even controversial?" The only comment I had, and I reiterated to her, I don't get involved in this stuff. I'm a non-combatant in these culture war battles, but I find the divide among feminists fascinating because the arguments advanced on both sides are under the rubric of feminism. And I saw one explicit post that was like, these second wave feminists need to hurry up and die already. And it was from a self-styled identified Canadian feminist. Again, I don't have anything to add. I don't have anything to contribute on this front. Oh, but it is interesting. Like, this was one for me. I am not a participant, but I am a very engaged spectator. I find watching this very, very fascinating. You and I had talked a few months ago about Anne-Marie Owens, a former boss of both of us at the National Post, herself a proud feminist who has been an advocate for women in journalism for a long time. I don't know if seeing these debates unfolding in the pages of the Toronto Star is a coincidence.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think that Amo is directing Rosie DiManno. I think Rosie DiManno says whatever the hell she wants.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, read the column and you'll have that view reinforced.
Yeah, I think Rosie DiManno just does not give a shit, and frankly, I think Margaret Atwood is at a position where she doesn't give a shit either. And one thing I do like about second wave feminists is that they are points in their lives and their careers where they don't have to care anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like the J.K. Rowlings and all these other people, the Dave Chappelle's, whatever you think about their positions, they have made enough money that they can just say what they think and not care. When that gives them a special responsibility, I actually think, to be honest with themselves and be honest with the discourse and not worry about the judgments of history and instead say what they actually think, which is great because not all of us can. I mean, that's just the reality.
We're working on it.
Well, we're working on it. But yeah, I think it's interesting that it's in the Star. I don't consider myself a culture warrior either. I try to take a pretty nuanced position on some of the trans stuff. I don't think that I've taken an extreme position on any of it. I'm perfectly happy to talk about some of these issues, but like I wouldn't consider myself a TERF. I don't think of that phrase as even particularly offensive, to be honest with you, but I'm not a radical feminist, but I also think that there's an inherent, I think that any sort of broader attempt to deconstruct gender to the point of making it insignificant is doomed to failure. I just don't think that that's going to work.
I think my views on this are even more basic. Like I see no problem identifying a person by their preferred pronouns.
Totally.
I know someone who is struggling with gender identity, is struggling through something that's incredibly painful and disruptive. And the last thing I'm going to do is grandstand about them and turn their struggle into a broader cultural identity. But there have been other worthy movements in the past that have been co-opted for a broader illiberal agenda, and this could be one of them. And I'm probably, my culture war participation is always defensive. Like I really, like, there are very few policy issues I care about that are controversial in the culture war, but I do insist that people have a right to disagree, and that words are not always violence. They can be.
Well,
there can be harassment.
Totally. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I also take a classical liberal point of view on this, where I'm just like, I actually think in a liberal society, people should have the absolute right to express themselves in any way they want. Like it just comes down to a question of personal expression. And if you want to, I don't care. It's your business. I don't give a shit. If you want to, use a certain pronoun or use another pronoun, I don't see any particular reason to not respect that. But no, I don't think it's healthy to create a culture where sort of some of these nuanced side issues, like, for example, who gets to use a rape shelter, or whether or not it's appropriate to harass a rape shelter, like these are sort of very marginal issues that where you have a genuine question of competing rights between marginalized groups.
Yep.
And I don't think that the correct response is to just bulldozer over one marginal group. Like I do think that we are still negotiating compromises around the edges of some of these issues, and just saying that there's one right answer to some of this stuff in all cases, and just we're going to cancel you and shut down your employer and harass you online if you disagree. I don't think that that's healthy or liberal. I just don't think that leads us to a good place, and I don't think it has led us to a good place.
Well, we'll see where this segment of the video ends up being used against us in the future.
I fully expect it will. But anyway,
also on my list. So this was kind of a mixed bag of topics, but I think the lead item would be the fact that when I guess it was this morning, Thursday morning. We're filming this Thursday afternoon. The federal government came out and announced its plans for a federal vaccine passport. I don't mean a mandate for the public service. I mean an actual travel document so that Canadians can travel abroad. And I interviewed, by coincidence, he was already booked to come on my radio show today. I host a radio show every morning on satellite, and Justin Ling, freelance journalist, was on with me, and he's been writing about this for a while. And basically, after all the talk about this, the feds have basically thrown in the towel and said, all right, we're going to let the provinces do it. And there will be some national verification standards so that the provincial passports will have kind of the certification of the federal government, which we hope will matter for international travel purposes. Because, like, what do you do if you show up in the European Union on a flight and you're like, here's my Newfoundland vaccine certificate? So I think we're hoping that stamping a maple leaf at the top of it helps. Basically, it is a federal level verification and standardization for what the provinces have already been doing. And what you asked me then was, is this the sort of thing that we should have Parliament back about? Like, is it weird that Parliament's back? Kind of yes and no. I don't think Parliament not being convened right now matters in particular. I don't think if we had butts and seats in the HOC right now, that it would be like, oh, and here's the federal passport we might have had if only we'd had our act together. But I know people roll their eyes when we say this, but the longer we get away from the election, the further away from the election we get, the harder it gets for anyone to pretend that it was anything other than Justin Trudeau's grasp for a majority, right? Because the whole narrative at the start of the campaign was big decisions, got to consult Canadians, plan for the future. The campaign happens, he falls 10 seats short, and then everything just kind of coasts to a stop. I mean, it was announced today that the CRB, the Canada Response Benefit, and some of the income supports are ending as well and transitioning to something else. But that was all going to happen anyway. There's been nothing new that has come out of the election. The military sexual assault scandal, sexual misconduct scandal, still going. We still don't have a federal travel document. We're not going to have one. We've given up on it. The federal supports are ending on schedule. I don't know what the hell we're doing in Ottawa right now. We went from, in mid-August, urgent need to consult Canadians to plan a future direction. Here we are, late October, nothing is happening. Nothing is happening, at least, that would not have happened anyway. So I'll stitch something together on that. I also want to throw this at you. And I don't really know at this time what to make of it, except that this is now very suddenly on my radar. I don't know if you've been watching the COVID numbers. Canada's COVID numbers are good. Even in Alberta and Saskatchewan, the numbers are improving. The healthcare crisis continues. because there's a lag time between cases and infections. So the healthcare crisis in Alberta and Saskatchewan is still raging, but your case numbers are coming down. Like, you guys seem to have gotten on top of this. We're doing great in Eastern Canada, like weirdly great, like no bump after Labor Day, no bump after Thanksgiving. So just when I was thinking it was time to start planning the victory parade, the COVID numbers in the United Kingdom have gone nuts. The case counts are surging, and more alarmingly, the NHS is feeling it too. So this is not just some weird case bump with like a bunch of teenagers went to a rave or something. We're hearing public statements from officials in the UK saying we're looking at this. We might have to reimpose some measures. Whatever is happening there is unusual. Something is going on in the UK, which gets my attention because the United Kingdom has often been our canary in the coal mine. What has happened in Canada.
Remember also that Alberta used what was happening in the UK to plan its reopen for summer plan.
Best summer ever. Yeah.
Which at the time seemed reasonable because the case count had dramatically declined in the UK, and even when the case count started to go up in the UK, it wasn't accompanied by a comparable rise in hospitalization rates. So, if you looked at the UK and you were looking at that situation, we were more highly vaccinated with a higher quality vaccine. Like, this seemed like the way to go. Turns out that was wrong. That was, and I mean, I've written about several times why that was wrong. I mean, one of the big problems in Alberta is that we were not as consistently well vaccinated. We had real pockets of massively under-vaccinated populations. And as a result, the virus was able to take root and continue to spread. So if things are happening in the UK where they're going haywire, that is something that we should be concerned about, because I'd be watching that like a hawk.
Well, the problem is, like I was saying to you before, most people don't know this. They always mangle this, and it makes me mad. DEFCON 1 is the bad one. DEFCON 5 is the good one. People always invert this. They think DEFCON 5 is the bad one. No, DEFCON 1 is normal. DEFCON 1 is when the nukes are flying. So I don't think we're going to come down to like COVID-Con 5 for a long time. Probably the best we're going to get is like COVID-Con 4, because we have to keep watching to see either two things. And what's happening in the UK right now, maybe it's a statistical blip. I don't want to get needlessly alarmed about this, but there's two other things it could be. One, we could be seeing what happens when the initial course of vaccination runs out. Maybe what we're seeing in the UK is proof that boosters are necessary and are going to remain necessary. Like, there may be waning immunity that the UK is basically now running into. It could also be a new variant. And I don't say that to be alarmist, but this is part of our future now. And I this sucks. And
this is also something that I've been trying to get across. And people have been very angry at me about. I'm going, like, it's endemic. Yes, there are going to be spikes and decreases, and I did not predict the last fourth wave being as catastrophic as it was, particularly here in Alberta, and I own that. But we're talking about an endemic virus. We are going to have to learn how to live a life with this in the background for the foreseeable future until it really burns itself out. Eventually it will. It's just a question of, are we talking about something that's going to happen 6 months or 6 years or 60 years from now? And there's no answer to that question. So in the meantime, we have to learn to live a life with this, and we can't. My argument to this has always been, like, lockdowns are always a temporary solution to a long-term problem.
Yep.
If we're dealing with an endemic virus, we can't be shutting down all of society every time the case rates go up or the hospitalization rates go up. It's not sustainable if you're talking about a permanent feature of the system now.
I think there's psychological lag, though, which is something that I did not have a hard time understanding, was that we have a nastier flu now. COVID's nastier than the flu, and the flu fucks stuff up every year. And we are constantly on guard for the next 1918 flu. We got used to something that wasn't sustainable with the flu. COVID's nastier. It seems to change faster. It's more deadly across a broader swath of the population. We just, like, people keep thinking, oh, one day COVID will be over. I think there's a psychological lag for people who haven't realized yet. We have a new thing forever. It's like we didn't have it before, but now we do, and we have to adapt to it. So what's happening in the UK? I'm not panicked. I'm not panicked at all, but I'm watching it, because I want to know what's happening there. And maybe it is as simple as we all go get our third Pfizer and then we're golden. Maybe it's something darker. Like we just don't know. We're gonna have to be prepared for it. I'll whip something up on that, just something short, kind of just like we're gonna have to remain vigilant. I'll grab a chart as well, and I'll include the chart showing the really weird spike, because there's all these like national comparisons, right? And all of a sudden a few weeks ago the UK starts going right up.
The other thing that we're going to have to start talking about in a country is, like, bluntly, like, we're going to have to start expanding ICU capacity to manage these surges. We can't have what's happening in Alberta, where we're on, go to DEFCON 1, because there's 200 people in an ICU in a province of 4 million. Like, we can't continue to do that. Like, it's just not sustainable anymore. We have to actually have surge capacity, real surge capacity.
The problem
for long term.
Let me ask you this though. I agree. Like, we need to build out the hospital system on its own merits. The Canadian healthcare system has been too small for generations. We knew that before the pandemic, but we're cheap and we didn't want to spend on it. Yeah. Here's the problem. If Alberta had double the ICU capacity, would it have mattered, or would Kenny have just let things rage the extra 2 weeks until that level was reached?
Oh, I think it would have mattered. And I think it's impossible to know what the number is, right? Like, this is the problem. Did we need to have 1,000 beds or 500? Like, would it have given us a couple of more days of room to maneuver? Yes. But ultimately, remember, Alberta's not locked down.
Yeah.
Everything's open. Essentially, what the government has essentially adopted right here is a let it burn strategy. I mean, we're doing masking indoors, and there are some limited capacity limitations, and like we've got like the vaccine mandates and or the vaccine passports. So you technically have to show your passport at a door in order to get into a restaurant, and like I'm sure all of those measures have an impact. But other than that, things are pretty normal. So essentially, like those measures have kind of probably blunted the growth curve a little bit, but I don't think they've stopped it. So essentially, the virus is just burning through. We're not locking things down. And
look, I agree with you about ICUs on their own merits, though. But I understand the argument people make that, especially like Doug Ford, Jason Kenney, and others, they were always going to run the system as far as they could take it before they blinked.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if we had doubled the ICU capacity, I don't think we would be in a different situation. Our healthcare system just wouldn't be on the verge of collapse. I think we would still probably have 200, 300 people in ICU, and we'd be able to carry on as normal. That's, I think, the reality. And I think we need to build out our ICU capacity to be able to handle that.
I don't know if you're right or not, but I'm not going to argue against a bigger ICU system. And
yeah, I mean, it's just like, but that to me, that this is the almost the equivalent of, like, if you have seat belts, then people will drive faster, right? Like, we need more ICU capacity, and we always have. Moving on.
So for the viewers who stick it out for these videos week in and week out, this is like the third or fourth week in a row we're talking about supply chains. I actually have made meaningful progress this week. So I think the supply chain article is going to come out next week. My interview with Trevor Toombe, and I did check with him how to pronounce his name. It is Toombe. We didn't know if it was Toombe, or Tombe. It's Toombe, he told me. Toombe like Doom. He's an economist at the University of Calgary, and I spoke with him this week about inflation. A long Q&A interview, covered all the questions I could think to ask. The supply chains element came up a lot in it, and it's a problem, right? Because right now we're in a situation where supply chains are preventing us from getting goods that have been manufactured, which is a drag, right? Like, stuff being built can't get to where it's going. We could get ourselves into, and arguably maybe we are already getting ourselves into, a situation where stuff never gets built in the first place because you can't source the inputs. Where, it's one thing right now to be like, we talked last week about blenders, right? Mm-hmm. Right. It's a very different situation when a cargo ship full of 10 million blenders is stranded off the California coast. And as soon as that ship finally docks, we're going to be flush with blenders. Every Walmart across the land will have blenders. If we don't start fixing these supply chains, the blenders that we would be buying next year will never get built in the first place, because the parts won't get from where they're manufactured to the factory. And as Trevor had said, agricultural products are perishable. So if we can't figure out how to get some of these supply chains figured out, not only are we going to have economic problems in North America, because North American farmers will have the bounty of their land rotting before it can get where it has to go. We'll have enough food to eat in North America. Huge parts of the world are reliant on North American agricultural exports for survival. So this is something we'd better start getting figured out. I'll put just something about that in the dispatch, not much, because the main article I think will come next week. The last thing is, we only got a couple minutes left in the video before I got to go pick up my kids. Doug Ford shat the bed again this week, where he was talking about immigration, and the context of the comments was Ontario has a labor shortage. Like, we are desperate for human beings, particularly in the skilled trades. And Doug had said, he's demanding the federal government work with him to bring in more immigrants. And then he sort of veers over and he also says, but I'll tell you this, we don't want anyone coming over here and not thinking they're going to work and just going to be collecting the dole. And it's just like, he immediately got attacked for, he's trading in anti-immigration tropes. He's a racist. What Doug Ford said was stupid, but I wasn't bothered so much by the anti-immigration trope as the fact that the man is completely incoherent. We're desperately short immigrants. We love immigrants. We have great immigrants, and don't come over here to collect the dole. Like, these are like two different talking points coexisting in his brain at the same time, sort of both erupting. Are we, like, if you don't know what Doug Ford is by this point, you haven't been paying attention. This is just the kind of stuff he says. Rather than lining up between one aggrieved party or another to say, what he said was outrageous, why do none of us care that the leader of Canada's most populous province is just a walking, talking jumble of contradictory talking points and slogans?
Yeah, I mean, Doug Ford is a cautionary tale to conservatives, period. He's the classic example of a mediocre white man who's fallen up and failed forward into an ultimate position of authority. And I mean, no offense to mediocre white men, but
no,
like,
I can't judge him on that ground.
It just who happened to fail into a position of authority because he happened to sort of inadvertently win the PC race because of weird rules that he didn't kind of technically win, but he sort of won, and then he came in at exactly the right moment when
the provincial Liberals just exhausted themselves,
exhausted themselves, right? And like, he's probably going to win the next election too, because nobody seems to be able to get their shit together.
I agree.
And this is actually the risk for conservatives more generally. It's just this putting these incompetent people into positions of power at exactly the right moment, right?
If this a wild counterfactual is Kathleen Wynne does not win the 2014 election, which was a surprise. Not a shock, because she's a very good campaigner and she was very personally popular with a lot of people. If she had not been able to salvage that somewhat surprising Liberal majority in 2014, you have, I think, Tim Hudak would have been the Premier of Ontario for a term. The Ontario Liberals probably then can bounce back, sort of, reset, rinse, repeat, come back with a new leader, fighting fresh. Instead, what we ended up with in 2018, as you said, was Doug Ford winning the Ontario PC leadership on a technicality after losing the popular vote due to a bizarre vote weighting formula the party used. It should have been Christine Elliott. She was the choice of the majority of the party, but Ford won it on geographic distribution points. And then goes up against Kathleen Wynne, who is exhausted and her government is flying apart at the seams. I don't know if you remember this, but basically she was begging, please elect enough Liberals that we can hold the balance of power. Like, it was just a complete disgrace. And then the greatest global catastrophe of the last 75 years happens on Doug Ford's watch. So yeah, he's a cautionary tale for a lot of things. I just wonder why anyone ever gets mad about anything in particular he says, because a lot of it's just a weird mishmash of contradictory talking points that he can't stop uttering. So that's,
I mean, my position on Doug Ford has always been, this guy is not Trump. like, honestly, he isn't. He's just kind of a mediocre dude who fell into this position. And like, is he qualified for it? No. Is he good at it? No. But
he'll be a 2-term majority premier probably.
But like, I don't know what to say. Like, this is Ontario's problem. Man, I got an Allen inquiry to deal with over there.
Well, you know what? On that note, you go deal with that. I'll worry about Ontario. As ever, we will ping our friends and see if anything is on their mind they want to include in the dispatch. Thanks, guys. Another great week here at The Line. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.